Once upon a time, there was a short track in southwestern Ontario, Cayuga its name, opened in 1966 and purchased by Bob Slack the following year. Cayuga has hosted some of the richest names in closed-wheel racing, guys like Darrell Waltrip, Rusty Wallace, Bill Elliott, Bobby Allison, and those are just some of the drivers who raced there. What about the names who won? Dale Earnhardt, Mark Martin, Matt Kenseth, Alan Kulwicki. And while the track never hosted Richard Petty, a king did race there, our king, Don Biderman, the Canadian racing star who was no stranger to victory lane and also drove the number 43, including one car he purchased from Petty. In fact, Cayuga's seen many legendary Canadians, guys like Junior Hanley, Don Thompson Jr., Dave Whitlock, Peter Gibbons. The track has hosted different series and types of racing, from stock cars to modifieds, open wheel to trucks. Unfortunately, the once popular track fell on hard times. It's been shuttered since 2009, but 2017 is a whole new year. Cayuga is back, a newly renovated track with a new name, Jukasa Motor Speedway, with cars set to hit the track later this summer, and with Canada celebrating its 150th birthday, CANrace commemorates the holiday for race fans with a visit to one of the most historic tracks in the country. We take a tour, talk legendary racers, and more on our two-part special. It all starts right now. Welcome here to our Canada 150 special for CANrace. We're at Jukasa Motor Speedway, or as some of you may know better as Cayuga Motor Speedway, the historic and prestigious track. Now let's talk about some of the top racers and all-around competitors in Canadian racing history, and we all did our research. Let's start with Stephen.
Yeah, so I want to start with Paul Tracy. He's a guy that he raced NASCAR for a bit. He did do some Xfinity races, and he did attempt a truck race, but he was mostly known for his IndyCar and kart days. He's a champion, and he was one of the he was part of the resurgence of Canadian drivers after Gilles Villeneuve a long time ago, and then around the same time we got Greg Moore, we got Jacques Villeneuve, and we got Paul Tracy, and it was incredible. Patrick Carpentier, if you want to throw that in too, a former Canadian driver. Well, used to race NASCAR at least, and he was fantastic. Won at every level. Went to IndyCar, went to NASCAR. Had some decent success, and then he went to Grand Am, which was kind of his calling card, his final way of doing it. Now, of course, he works for NBC. Then, of course, Don Thompson Jr. You can't forget a guy who basically dominated the series for years. He pretty much won every year he went out, and he was dominant. Now he works with Kevin Lacroix, and with Kevin Lacroix, that's a guy that's I think's really benefiting from him, and for sure I think that was a great decision for him to kind of stay in the sport afterwards. And I guess if the NASCAR Pinty series was NASCAR like a couple years earlier, I think we'd see Don Thompson in the NASCAR Hall of Fame just because of how much of an impact. But his best years were behind him by the time he actually went to the when he went to the NASCAR portion of the series. And then there's Peter Gibbons. I think he brought the series to the mainstream at least. And there was a time when when the Pinty series was on Speed Vision, and before it came Speed and later Fox Sports 1, and for those races to be on there, that was a pretty big deal because you could be in the States and watch it. But then you throw in the fact that he was sponsored by Canadian Tire, and his diecasts were in Canadian Tire stores, and he was winning, and his paint scheme never changed. It was the same for the entire time he drove the number one car, and it was kind of cool to see him do so well. And when you see the diecast there, it kind of shows this is that's a big deal for something like that to be a Canadian Tire. I know, Bryce, when we went to Delaware, we saw his hauler right outside the track, so I think that was pretty cool.
Yeah, certainly was.
So I really want to focus on the Canadians in the Cup Series because there's not a lot of them, let's be honest. And not just the drivers, even though I will focus most on drivers. There's three main people I want to talk about: Earl Ross, Cole Pearn, and DJ Kennington. First off, Cole Pearn. He was in CASCAR for about 3 years, 2001 to 2003. His last race was actually here at this track. Never won a race, didn't really win any poles either, but he is dominated as a crew chief in the NASCAR Cup Series. It is amazing. He was number one in point standings before Kyle Larson won last weekend at Michigan. But I mean, he's been in contention for championships. He graduated from the University of Waterloo here in Ontario. He's from a small town just outside of London, Ontario. So to have a Canadian that is in the Cup Series and is making that much headway. I actually spoke to a Martin Truex Jr. fan when I was at Pocono a couple weekends ago. He had no idea Cole Pearn was Canadian. Absolutely no idea. So when I told him, he was kind of mind blown about it, but Cole Pearn is definitely making headway for Canadians in NASCAR as a sport. Next one, Earl Ross, the only Canadian to have ever won in the Cup Series. He was also Rookie of the Year in 1974. But it was really just the only Canadian to ever do so. I mean, and then you have DJ Kennington, who was the first first driver to race in a Cup Series in almost 30 years, and now he's racing in Daytona again. So he's definitely the only driver right now making headway for Canadians in the Cup Series.
And certainly maybe he'll pull off the win. It's on Canada Day as well. You got to mention the Villeneuves. That's the drivers that stand out to me. Gilles Villeneuve, his 6 Formula One victories, 13 podiums, almost won a championship there.
Racetrack named after him?
Yeah, racetrack named after him. Won at Monaco as well. When his first win came at Montreal in the first race in that city. And Jacques Villeneuve, of course, 11 Formula One victories, 23 F1 podiums, and the 1997 championship too. So he was really strong out of the gate in that series. Rookie of the Year in 1996, or that he finished second there in his rookie season. And he's competed in several other series too. We know NASCAR, sports cars, IndyCar as well, and he won the 1995 Indy 500. So consider them for sure as some of the top racers. And as we battle the wind here at Jukasa and try to flip the page, another driver that's important to note, I'll just throw that right out there. We have Scott Maxwell, of course, in sports cars, one of the top sports car racer, 2 Grand Am wins, 2 wins in the American Le Mans Series, and a class victory in the 2003 Rolex at Daytona. So he's certainly one of the big racers, helped develop the 4GT with Multimatic, and CANrace has mentioned some of the big names there. Kennington, who's won a couple championships, several races. Scott Steckley, a 4-time champion under the NASCAR banner of the Pinty Series. Dave Whitlock as well, who's won several races in CANrace. So certainly some of the big name racers. Don Biderman, might as well rip this off too. Alex Tagliani, yes, Alex Tagliani, he's raced in several things. 5 Pinty Series wins, 1 win in kart. He's finished in the top 5 4 times in the Xfinity Series, raced in trucks, IndyCar. He's raced in about everything you can think of. Don Biderman, who's raced in several different short track events and won the Oxford 250 as a prestigious one in 1977. He was a big pioneer in that day, and who can forget as well Ron Fellows and all his success racing in different NASCAR series. 4 Xfinity wins, 2 in trucks, and won the overall Rolex at Daytona in 2001.
Which is something that Corvettes can't do these days, because they're technically the 3rd class. Next year they will be the 2nd class, but for them to win, he was so dominant when he raced with the Corvettes. At one point he was so far ahead of the competition, they pulled the car into the garage and sat out for a bit. Now we saw that at Le Mans, but it was because of an issue. But that back then was when cars, just making it to the end was a major thing, because cars were breaking down often. To see how good he was with that Corvette team was incredible, and I think, yeah, fantastic driver. One of the guys he actually tutored was Robert Wickens, who races in DTM now. He raced the 24 Hours Le Mans, and he actually did a switch, an IndyCar switch with James Hinchcliffe for a test. And I think they did it for a 2nd time recently out in Germany. And a guy like him, he started out racing go-karts, and eventually Fellows got wind of him and got him kind of moving, and got him the right stuff that he needed to go race both at Mosport and at CAN Motorsports in Hamilton, and he's now doing great. I think he's one of the most underrated Canadian drivers, and I think he would do fantastic if he came to North America. But if you're a Mercedes factory driver, I don't think you're going to complain. Another thing I wanted to talk about was the 2002 Canada Day shootout at Cayuga, which is now Jukasa. And that's an event that happened once, and it had 44 cars, which I believe is the biggest field they've ever had for a series. And if you know Cayuga, that's an impressive field, because it is a short track, and getting a 44-car field is impressive by any means in any series. And it was a cool thing, because they had a couple NASCAR guys there. They had Ted Musgrave, Matt Kenseth, Tony Stewart, Kenny Schrader, Johnny Benson. And at the time, Tony Stewart won the championship later. there that year, and Matt Kenseth ended up winning the championship in 2003. And Matt Kenseth won the race, and there's a couple guys that actually still race in the series today. DJ Kennington raced then. We had Scott Steckley, who doesn't race, but he's still involved in the sport. Of course, Don Thompson. But then Robin Buck, who, he's going to race a couple of races this year. And there was Mark Dilley, so who's still kind of kicking around. So there was a couple guys that were still involved in the series today that raced in that, and I thought it was a cool event. It was my very first oval race I ever went to. I sat out by turn 1, and I think that was a cool experience and a great moment for the series. It brought a lot of fans, and I think it kind of kicked off to show to NASCAR, what, this is something you guys should take a look at. And a couple years later, NASCAR took over CASCAR.
So lots of big names we mentioned there, the Villeneuves as well, Kennington, DJ Kennington, big name in Canadian racing, and Paul Tracy, big in IndyCar. There's several names, and there are many others that we couldn't even get around to mentioning. So what Canadian even racing moments, such as Earl Ross's Cup win and as well the Indy 500 win by Jacques Villeneuve, what moments, what drivers stand out to you? Let us know on social media. You can tweet us at CANrace NASCAR using the hashtag CANrace150, and you can also, we'll put a post up on Facebook where you can comment there too. That will do it for part 1 of our Canada 150 special. Thanks for watching. Tune in Saturday, July 1st for the conclusion as we tour the track, speak with General Manager Alex Nagy, and more. Special thanks to Dave Franks for providing us with historic photos and context, and special thanks to Alex Nagy for welcoming us to Jukasa and giving us a tour of the track.